Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. And now that the Super Bowl is over, your Washington Commanders have just moved into a four-way tie for first place in the NFC East. How about that? Go crazy, folks. Anyway, Sam Fortier from the Washington Post is going to join me in a couple minutes to discuss some offseason topics, playing off of what Ron Rivera said during a Super Bowl media tour last week. I had an interview with Rivera that I played on Friday. We can go back and listen to that and find out some of those issues. But the one thing we started with and talked the most about was Chase Young's fifth-year option, because I think there's a lot of meaning in it. Now, keep in mind, I emphasize the word, they're undecided on it. There's still a few months left. Anyways, Sam and I get into all that, but the key word is undecided. The ramifications of that, Montez Sweat being a free agent, et cetera. You have Daron Payne up this year that you want to sign. You want to give the extension to Cam Curl, all sorts of things. We also talk about some under the radar decisions to this offseason and find out what we talked about there. A lot of other things. Anyway, stay tuned for that in a couple minutes. As always, a few things first, starting with the offensive coordinator search. And that means with the Super Bowl over, they, of course, want to interview Kansas City offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy. They have been interested in him for a while. That's why they have waited to make a decision here. They have, of course, talked to 6 other coordinator candidates. Bieniemy is expected to be the last. So here are a couple things with that. One, obviously, Baltimore does sound like they want to interview him as well. So it could well come down. It sounds like it'll come down to Washington or Baltimore if both teams want to offer him the position. Why would he go here or there? Well, the answer is really simple. He's not the primary play caller in Kansas City, never will be as long as Andy Reid is there. It's not really his offense. You're running Andy Reid's offense. This would give going with a defensive coach like Ron Rivera or a guy who came from special teams like John Harbaugh would give him a chance to run his offense the way he needs to, et cetera. So I think those are some of the reasons why he would want to leave Kansas City. Why here? Why? Well, I don't know if he'll choose here. So I don't know. I think one of the things you'd have to look at for him is how much do you like the skill talent here? But there are going to be questions for him at quarterback. While Ron Rivera and a lot of people can say, Sam Howell could be the guy. We don't know. We don't know what he's going to be. He could be pretty good. He could be pretty ordinary. We don't know. We know that he's not proven. We know that they need to find more offensive linemen. We also know in Baltimore that they need to improve their skill talent, but they do have Lamar Jackson. However, what if something goes astray there with their negotiations with him? Then what happens? So I think there's a lot of things to consider. And I know that the ownership situation could factor here. You're going to look at Baltimore or Baltimore, if you wanted to go there, is maybe having more stability because you have an established coach there who has won there, and you have an ownership situation that's a lot more settled than it is here. That could factor into a decision for him as well. I don't know. But anyway, stay tuned. I think the OC stuff will be over this week. That's the expectation. The timing of it will depend on when he does interview here, when he would interview in Baltimore, and then go from there. So that's one thing. The other thing is on Sam Howell. And just a couple of things. When Sam Fortier and I talk about this, it wasn't a big surprise that Ron Rivera said publicly for the first time that he was going to be the quarterback QB1 going into the offseason or going into the spring workouts. That's not really the discussion here. It's really about why and how much do they like him, et cetera. And I know some people have said, well, if he liked him so much, why was he going to start Taylor Heinicke? Well, I can tell you from firsthand knowledge, I know what they were talking about leading into that game, going into that decision. And the whole thing was, I know there was a desire to start Heinicke and then bring Howell in because they absolutely, Ron Rivera and the team and the franchise wanted to see Howell play before that season ended. So he was always going to play against Dallas. But the initial thought, and you can disagree with this, I think you can have, if you have a problem with this line of thinking, have at it. But the thinking was start Heinicke, limit some of the pressure or the hype, for lack of a better word, around Howell leading into that game, let him kind of ease into the week and ease into the game and not put too much on him. Again, you can say like that's the wrong approach. Fine. But I do know that they want to see him there, because I think there's some people saying, well, if he likes him so much to name QB1, why did he not want to see him in the game? They did want to see him, and he wanted to see him in other games because he talked about it during the season a couple times. And there were a couple times that somebody told me that he was told that the other coaches didn't think that Howell was ready. So that's the information that you're going to go off of. Regardless, I do know that they like him. I do know that they liked him before the draft, and that was the guy that some people there, and some that I think that's where they would have gone had they not traded for Carson Wentz. They would have gone for Howell earlier than the 5th round for sure, and had him compete, or brought him in and try to develop him to be in this situation. Anyway, you can go wherever you want with that information. You can also have whatever you want to say about how good you think Howell's going to do or not do. We have a bunch of months to speculate on all that, but I did want to at least kind of inform on what I just told you, because I think there's some out there that are just a little bit confused by the whole thing, or questioning where I don't think they need to really question. Anyway, then now let's get into some of the ownership stuff. One of the things I found interesting, and if you go back, Sean Payton, now the coach for the Denver Broncos, formerly with New Orleans, said on a one radio show, which I was actually surprised he said this, but he said that one of the ownership groups, potential ownership groups to buy the Commanders, had reached out to him about joining them as the coach. I don't blame him. I think that's natural for ownership groups, if you're going to come onto a place, to inquire about a guy at his level to see, would you be interested in coming here if I buy this team? I think what's unusual is for Peyton to actually say it out loud when there's a guy that he's competed against for a while is still in the position. It was an odd thing to say. And it was a very odd thing to say. You don't hear another head coach saying that. I'm curious why they would say that. I think the other interesting part and I don't know if he has a beef with Rivera or not. I've never heard that, but maybe there is one. But again, I was surprised that a coach would say that while another coach still has a job. But I did find it interesting how they talked about the franchise and how, where it was at before, where it could still be in the future. And I think there's still, I think there's hope that this franchise can get back up there once this sale is ever consummated. Now, on to the sale. So there's going to be a lot of speculation over the next month or two until this thing is finally sold. And we're going to be talking about this later this week, about some of that speculation, what you need to pay attention to, et cetera. Right now, I'd say, what do we know? Because that's, as a reporter, I'd say, what do we know? Well, we know that Josh Harris certainly is interested and did tour the facility recently. And so, we know that. What does it mean? Well, it means he's interested. And if you're going to buy something like this and you're going to spend billions of dollars, you may want to see what you're buying, in addition to not just the team, but the facilities. What else are you going to need to invest in this team to make it work? And he'd also toured the Broncos facilities before that team was sold. He, of course, did not get it. So we also know that Jeff Bezos has not put an offer in yet, but doesn't mean he can't. These deadlines feel kind of soft. And you can't tell me if there's like a February 20th deadline, let's say, whatever, 15th or whatever it is. If on the 16th, Bezos says, yeah, you know what, I'll give you $7 billion. Do you think they're going to say no? Or do you think say it's too late? Sorry, your offer is the best one by $1 billion, but you came 24 hours too late. No, I don't think so. Anyway, so that's what we know. And we know that there are others obviously interested. And I think then you start speculating names. Todd Bowley, another name you've heard a few times is David Stewart. Is he actually interested? Did he put in a bid? You hear some talk that there is interest there, but I don't know for sure. So, it's right now, it's a lot of speculation. With billionaires comes a lot of speculation. Not everybody wants it public. Some do. I think the rule of thumb has been that guys who really want the publicity early on are probably not the guys who are going to be there in the end. So a lot of times it's done in quiet. So that's why I say there's going to be a lot of speculation. Some of the speculation, you have to question, why is that story coming out there? Is somebody floating this to try and drive up the price, or trying to entice somebody else like a Bezos to get involved? A lot more to learn on this. Just don't let your heads go crazy. What we also know is that the team is up for sale. There is a reason why it's up for sale. And it's not just a matter of people going to Dan Snyder saying, hey, would you sell it? They put the team up for sale for a reason. Now, do they have to sell it? Doesn't sound like it, but if they don't get the offer they want, but what we also know is that there's a lot of debt that the Snyders are taking on, and they'd have to take on even more to build a stadium. And I think to do that, and I'm not sure that the NFL would allow them to do that. So you have to keep in mind some of these facts. There is a strong motivation for them to have to sell. And the expectation internally is still that they're going to sell. So just keep all that in mind when you start to read all speculation. But again, until anything's official, nothing is official, right? There you go. I know that's not a lot of great insight, but it's just trying to make sure that you pay attention to what you know versus what is being speculated on. I think that's always important in a situation like this. And I try and bring on some people and try and educate myself more about some of this process and where it's going, so I can better inform you of what's going on and bring you some people who can at least analyze this maybe in a good way, so you can learn and know what should you pay attention to and what should you not. Anyway, that's all I got from me. Right now, well, now, not in a minute, right now, here's my conversation with Sam Fortier from the Washington Post. And by the way, you can follow him on Twitter at Sam Fortier. There you go. Here is Sam Fortier. Sam, the big thing that or I guess, because we're taping this on Friday, this is going to come out Sunday night / Monday. A few days ago, Ron Rivera made the rounds at the Super Bowl, and one of the topics, there are a couple of things, the quarterback situation, which we largely knew, but I think he expanded on some of that, but then also the Chase Young 5th-year option, and how right now it is undecided what they're going to do. And so it still could be picked up. But first of all, were you surprised that they're undecided even at this point with his 5th-year option?
Keim, this is a great point, and I love that you always jump right into the news, but I feel like we got to step back for a second and talk about the biggest story that came out of Super Bowl week, which was that your son got awarded a scholarship.
Yes.
And I think so congratulations.
Thank you.
It's very cool to see his hard work recognized.
He works his ass off, and we're very proud of him. And his brains come from his mom, and I'm not sure what comes from me. And if he tells bad jokes in a few years, then I'll know what he got from me.
Well, he doesn't get the dancing skills from you?
No, he does not. So a little story on that. Last weekend, we went up he goes to Boston Conservatory, was in his first performance. And during it, at one time, they kind of had like this mini break. And one of the dancers came out and said, "Hey, everybody in the audience, stand up. We're going to teach you how to do a couple moves." So I'm thinking, okay, like this place is packed and there are dancers in here, for God's sake. So, I get up there. I'm like, well, I better stand up. I should stand up, blah, blah, blah. And she does a move. I'm like, oh man, I'm already off. She does another move. I'm like, oh, and it's like, if there had been someone tapping the shoulder of people who were eliminated, they'd have come on right then and put me down. So I just sat down, like, I'm not going to embarrass myself anymore. There was a camera behind us, and the chance that I was going to be on there, I'm like, sit down now. You can only embarrass yourself. And so I sat down. So but yeah, he gets hit. My wife, his great grandmother was a professional dancer and was in movies and all that. So there's a lineage there, and there could be a whole show devoted to what she did. But I think that would kind of steer the conversation in a way that people are like, what the hell is this? But I appreciate you bringing that up. And the kid has worked awfully hard. Props out to my son, Sean. Anyway, now
I'm not super surprised that you sat down to not be on tape, because I know you don't like grinding tape, and that's not really your thing.
Not in the offseason. Yeah.
To go back to your original question, Chase Young, am I surprised? Yeah, I am surprised that he would say that publicly. I do think this is sort of like, I think back to the 2021 mini camp when he wasn't there, and Ron talked about, oh, we had almost perfect attendance, and he went out of his way to be restrained about not criticizing Chase and Montez for not showing up. And for him to now say, we're thinking about it as motivation, like, if you're saying that about the guy, your first draft pick, the guy you picked number 2, should be a cornerstone of the franchise, you're sort of suggesting that you're worried about his level of motivation. You're sort of suggesting that he might need more of it. And so I'm surprised that he chose that tact. I think people in Chase Young's camp are a little bit surprised that he chose that tact. But if that's what he feels needs to be done, then, I credit him for not shying away from saying that publicly.
Right. And you're right. Like, there was a surprise with what was said. And I think the other thing is what you hear is like he's already been working out. So I also think the knee is still a factor for them, and the lack of information over the last 2 years, because you missed 20, I think it was what, 22 games, right? So that's a lot of time to miss when you're going into a deciding year when you're in his position, but it's still, and again, it still may happen, still might pick it up.
Sure. And I think like sort of the context for me is Curtis Samuel has surgery, but he doesn't want Ron to disclose it publicly, so Ron does it. Ron is known for being a player's guy,
Right.
protecting his players. And so when he comes out and says something publicly, it's obviously thought out. It's obviously, there's a point to it. And I think the knee is a totally legitimate, any coach, any team would probably have concerns, especially when it took that long to come back. So for him not to bring up the knee to talk about motivation, it was just sort of, there was a lot of signal there for me. And I'm not saying that. Go ahead.
No, go on.
I was just gonna say, it's not like this means Chase Young is going to be a bust or he's never going to live up to his immense potential. But it's notable to me that we're at this point in what it seems like is their relationship.
Right. And I think because he also brought up the Daron Payne factor. Now they obviously picked up Payne's 5th year, but that going into a contract year, his level of production really went up. And it could be a combination of things. It could be, I mean, he could have matured as a player. It could be the motivation of the contract certainly is going to be a big part of it for anybody. And then I think there's the change in defensive line coaches, I think helped that entire group. So I think all those factors worked for him. But the other aspect here is, or again, first of all, do you think they ultimately will, and this is just guessing now from our standpoint, but do you think ultimately they would pick it up? Because part of my theory here, Sam, is not theory, but thinking is they're going to see him come back in April and see what level of where he's at with everything in terms of the shape he's in, how the knee is, etc. They'll get a couple weeks they'll know, like, well, if he shows up like this, you can pick it up. If he doesn't, then maybe you don't. What do you think ultimately might happen here?
Yeah, I think how he comes back is certainly going to be an important indicator. And like you said, I think he's been working out. I was told this week already he's been working out for 2 weeks. He got back at it, especially because when you miss that time, your body isn't beat up like a lot of other guys. So he should theoretically have the capacity to hit it hard and show up in really good shape. So, I think when we talk about motivation, it's not just like, oh, we want him to play really hard on his 4th year, or because I still think they could even get a big long-term extension done before that 4th year, which a lot of guys do, right? Like as soon as you're eligible for an extension. But yeah, I think it's, hey, we want you to be in tip-top shape. We want you to show like, hey, I'm taking this extremely seriously. I think after his rookie year, when he wasn't there for those workouts, when he was shooting those commercials, they wanted to see more commitment. They wanted to, because if you're going to go through off-season workouts and you install everything and you get, and then you have to start over because your 2 starting, edge rushers weren't there, like that sets a team back. And I think that, that's what they want to avoid. And so if you can get him to show up in good shape, in committed and really ready to realize that potential, I think that could go a long way for your team.
Right. And I think that's another part of it. The other part is because you bring up Montez. There's a chance if you don't pick that up that they're both playing for contracts next year. Is that a good situation?
Well, so here's the other part of this that we haven't talked about. It's sort of the same as like, do you pull the lever of the franchise tag for Daron Payne?
Right.
Ron Rivera going into year 4 knows that he has to have a really great season because assuming there's a new owner, the new owner is going to want to pick his guy. He's been through the situation with David Tepper in Carolina. So I'm not saying that you're going to ask a player to risk his entire career, or play without that guarantee on a 4th year, like both those guys could be doing. But to me, it's sort of Ron Rivera has to do whatever it takes to make his team the best it can possibly be this fall. And it seems like he's figured out, okay, quarterback is more than likely going to be Sam Howell. We heard that. And if you have to, do whatever it is to get your edge rushers to show up and be the game wreckers that they're supposed to be, keep Daron Payne with the franchise tag. Like all those things I think are factors in Ron's mind of how do I get the most out of this team in 2023. I would be surprised if Montez and Chase both played this year for contracts, but I think it ultimately, for them as players wouldn't be the worst thing. And I think back to when we were in Houston in the locker room after the game, and Montez really talked about like him and John Allen. Obviously, it was Houston, so it wasn't great competition, but him and John Allen had some really great rushes off each other in that game.
Right.
When Montez talked about rushing together, rushing as a unit, which obviously they didn't do in 21, Montez was there and able to, I think, see the real-time benefits of, oh, like if John's diving inside, I need to stay outside. I need to stay high so we can keep the pocket together. And if you can have him continue fulfilling that responsibility, being an elite edge setter in the run game as well, like I think that would set both, it would certainly set him up for a big payday.
And that's a good point. And, the funny thing along with that, because I actually felt like the year before that Montez and John had figured it out. And then that's when Montez got hurt. So they were just starting to figure out, because you saw some plays against Denver that I remember like, oh, that was an example of what they've been wanting to see. So I think those two have the same mindset. They work well together. And so I think that's a good pairing. But then because then the other question comes, can you keep all four of those guys? I think that's where the advantage of Sam Howell comes, because he's on the rookie deal. So if he pays off, we don't know, but if he does, that's where you have the advantage to do that. If he doesn't, I don't know how you can keep all four of those guys together.
I don't, even if you have Sam Howell, I don't know if you can keep all four of those guys together. They're going to cost a lot of money. And I know that you can structure different cap hits. And, if you make Chase's or Montez's caps low when John's are high and you kind of even it out. Like, I understand there's a lot that you can do there, but four defensive linemen getting paid, especially if you're going to pay elite interior money at 19, 20 APY, if you're going to go elite on the edges, like, it's really hard for me to envision that. Like, if you can get away with it if Payne is on the tag this year, but giving all four of those guys long-term, big money, market level deals, I just don't see it.
And that's, I think, because I do think they'll look for a defensive end in this draft. Now, it could just be for backup pass rusher. You want more depth there. You always want, it's like looking for pitching in baseball. You always want to look for pass rushers. But I also think you want to set yourself up, because if you decide like we can't keep them both, who are we going to let go? Well, we have this guy here ready to take over here. That's how you have to think. So I could see that. And that's where you almost wonder, part of me would wonder if, again, we're talking 2 months they have to make this decision on, maybe it's it's probably 3 months?
May 1st. Yeah.
May 1st. Yeah, there you go. So they have some time to make this decision, but if they don't do the 5th year option, then I also wonder, do you just say like, go get it? We'll keep one of you guys.
Yeah, I think because this is where, to me, like Martin Mayhew and Rob Rogers and like those guys have to step in and really like help Ron Rivera like look at the longer picture here, because, and I know that those guys are arguably like not playing for their jobs necessarily, but like, everybody here knows like what the situation is.
Correct.
And so like that's why, like, when I see like Anthony Richardson or some of these quarterbacks mocked to them in the first round, like I sort of, disregard that, because I don't think that those guys are going to help in year one or year 4 for Ron, which he needs to maximize. But that's why the tag makes so much sense to me. And not to harp on this, but like it's sort of like, okay, you want to get a long-term deal done with Keim. But you can't do that if you're going to then prioritize all four of those D linemen.
Right.
So you're balancing what is the best for this team long-term versus what is the best for this team right now. Because like, I think personally, organizationally, if you're looking at this on a 5-year, 10-year time horizon, I think the smartest thing to do is a tag and trade with Daron Payne. Because if you can pick up, a 3rd round pick or that you lost when you traded for Carson Wentz, you can kind of like maybe get back to close to even there. That sets your team up for the future. Like that is, I think, what the Eagles have done so masterfully as we look at the Super Bowl. Like they've done so well at how do we get extra picks? How do we get comp picks? How do we maximize those picks? And then you can use one of them on a backup quarterback who then becomes a guy that can take you to the Super Bowl. So, but I don't necessarily think that that's how they're operating.
Right. And I think, if you trade Payne, with coming off the year he had, if another team's going to sign to a long-term deal, you can maybe get a 2nd round pick out of that too, depending on where in the 2nd round with it. And I think that's what, if I'm going to trade him for value, I'm going to I'm going to trade him. That's a great shot. He's got a little cat walking by him. I didn't know you were at Ben's house.
My my roommate actually adopted 2 cats recently, so this is Ruth that just walked by.
There you go. Anyway, but you could sit, I would want to get more value for him if I'm going to give him up right now to trade, because otherwise, I think if you're going into year 4 for Rivera, he has more value to you right now playing than he does setting you up for the future. But along those lines, then we talk about that. And then you look at quarterback, and they're kind of taking a different approach, because if you really felt like you better win this year, would you be more aggressive going out to getting guys who are now available to you rather than staying with Howell? Or because clearly his take is build up around the guy, because there's enough around him right now that if he gets the level of play that they think they can, they'll be better than last year. That's the thinking. But are you surprised at all with that tactic? And we've talked about Howell before. We know he's going to go in there as a thing, but are you surprised at all about that approach on that side of the ball?
So this is an interesting question. I feel like it kind of goes back to discussions that we've had maybe last offseason about like, how much do you value certainty or confidence? Because theoretically, yes, like your ceiling is higher. You would get better play if you were like, hey, we're willing to give a bag to Derek Carr, right? Like, or even like a Jimmy Garoppolo, or one of these more established veteran guys. Like but I almost would say that your confidence in like the range of outcomes is higher with Howell, even though he's younger, even though you've seen less of him on the field in games. You've seen more of him around the building. He's been, in, you can't even say the system because we don't really know what the system's going to be yet. But to me, I think Ron is just kind of scarred, sort of in the same way he's talked about center. Like Ryan Fitzpatrick comes in and gets hurt. Carson Wentz comes in and absolutely, flames out. So I think at this point he's like, all right, like I put my hand in the cookie jar and got swatted like a couple times. Let me stick with the guy that I know the best. And even though he might not be the best answer, he might not have the highest ceiling, I at least know him and I'm confident in the way that he works. And so I would totally concede an argument that Derek Carr is a more talented or a more established, right, with probably physical tools that you just know what you're going to get with him. But in this system, in this structure, with his personality in the building, I think those are big questions that are harder to quantify, but are very, very real to Ron.
And I'm glad you said that. And I also think the other part too, Sam, is then it's the combination of what you have to give up for that quarterback and are they worth it? And I would say no, because you can't, how much are you able to improve what they need to improve, which is the offensive line? What is that cap space going to prevent you from doing? Will it prevent you from signing one of these guys to a long-term extension this offseason? So that's where I would say, that's where, on the surface, initially you say, well, yeah, more proven and all that. But then when, in terms of roster building, it's not better for you. I don't think, like, unless you can get some, I'm, and Jimmy Garoppolo always hurt, would not, Rodgers would take way too much away from what they want to do. So I actually think offensively, you're better off building up that line, adding something there, getting more guys in the back 7 on defense to help you out.
A source told me that when I was coming on this podcast last minute, that I would be asked a question about like what is the most underrated decision that they had to make, and I haven't been asked that, so I'm just going to go ahead and say,
right,
it's a nice hint.
What's an under the radar decision or move you think they have to make this offseason?
Wow, thank you for asking, Keim. And it kind of goes to the point of the offensive line, and I think that it might see this is an under the radar one, because it seems like you may have already made it because of what you did in week 18, but you have to figure out, do you think Sam Cosmi is a tackle or a guard? Because that is going to affect how you build this offensive line, what you do with him. I mean, he's a 2nd-round pick, and obviously he was not pleased, as he told us in the locker room on cleanout day, about switching back and forth. And so, like when you're at the Senior Bowl and you have Travell Wharton coaching these offensive linemen, you're getting a really good look at guys that could be available to you in the first round, whether it be Darnell Wright from Tennessee, whether it be DeJuan Jones from Ohio State. Like, those are legitimate candidates for your pick in the first round. And so you have to say, like, okay, if we draft a tackle, is Sam Cosmi a guard? Like what are we do? What are we looking for? Regardless of
Right.
offensive system, what do we want? And so like maybe they've already made that decision. Obviously, Sam played tackle in that last game against Dallas. So perhaps you already know, but I think that is a decision that you have to stick to and allow him to develop going into his third year.
Right. And I also wonder for them if that will come down to when it gets time to the draft, who are you able to get? Are you getting a guy that's a tackle, then you slide him inside. If you get a guy that's a guard, then maybe you keep him outside. So I think that would be part of it too. I think another one for me would be, what do you do with Logan Thomas? Do you do anything? Because I think his cap number is like almost 9 million this year. They would save about approximately $3 million if they released him. Not, but will they keep him? And I think, like, you're a veteran in his stage. I know those guys get nervous about their future. When you look at some young guys, then it would be like, well, you still would want to add to that room if you did something with him. And I don't know that they will do anything with him. That's one of the decisions I think you're going to make. And I haven't heard rumblings on that. It's just that, veteran, he wasn't his best year because of the injuries. Sometimes to me, it was because of usage. A lot was because of usage, not use as much in the red zone. What's the future for him? And I'm not even advocating cutting him, but what is his future? And do you see him being used more in this offense?
Well, this goes back to who's the offensive coordinator, what is the scheme going to be to some extent. But to your point, like, I think that there's a very real possibility that he is cut. I think there's like a strong, there's like a totally fair to strong argument on keeping him. He's your best dual threat tight end. He offers, I think, a lot of veteran experience, savvy, being a former quarterback, finding those holes in the zone, which I think he was successful at when we've seen him at his best in Washington. Obviously a good red zone target. And, maybe the argument for letting him go is you have some talented tight ends behind him, particularly pass catchers. I think Armani Rogers, really flashed in the few months he was playing tight end before he got to Washington. And so to me, you have and Curtis Hodges, who was hurt, but I think I think that room is deep enough and has enough talent where if the offense looks like it did last year, where tight end is not the most important part, that you can say, okay, we will take the cap savings and we'll bet on the young guys. But I think that decision will hinge on what does the new OC come in and want.
Right. And I like Rodgers as a matchup problem. I think I think you can move around that. I also have a guy who's going to leave a message for the third time in a row on the YouTube page saying Darnell Washington from Georgia, pancakes guys and all that. I hear you. I got you. So you don't have to put it again, but I know I do hear you. Okay. So I do hear you, but it is a guy that would be that type of player. But again, it depends on who is a coordinator. And then I think we'll know as far as the draft goes, what they're going to do with what they do with Logan before that, if anything. So, that would be one. Last thing I want to bring up, do you have stadium update for us? I know you wrote a story earlier this week.
Yeah. So the Commanders stadium search, I would say the big picture takeaway here is it's in limbo. It's a little bit stuck in neutral while the ownership situation is being sorted out. But basically, Governor Glenn Youngkin proposed $500,000 to study ways to attract the Commanders in 2024, which is like, that's not an aggressive move like they were trying to make last year, where it was They were trying to make a stadium authority and give direct subsidies. So basically, but even that is being opposed by the Senate, which is the Virginia State Senate, which is interesting to me because if you look at the broad landscape, Maryland has shown no interest in improving their $400 million package that they proposed last year. DC still does not even have control of RFK. That's still owned by the federal government, and disagreements between the mayor and the council chairman are preventing them from even pursuing that. So for Virginia to oppose this to propose just the study is interesting to me, because if the owner changes, which I think we all expect it to, I think that this landscape could change really quickly. I think that jurisdictions could jump in and try to compete for what theoretically would be, a huge economic driver for the region. Maybe not as big as like some of the team-sponsored studies would lead you to believe, but still a significant economic opportunity. So I don't think this means Virginia's off the table, but certainly there is very little appetite to do anything to help the Commanders while Dan Snyder is the owner, as per usual.
Yeah, and that's like, you talk to some people there, and it's like, what's it going to take to get a stadium built? It's going to be new owner. And, that's what will open the door for RFK, for anywhere else. But I have this, my Lord, Sam, I have a feeling we might be at FedEx longer than we thought we might, because it's just hard to imagine that this gets done like that. It doesn't happen that way.
So they have to stay at FedEx until at least 2027, right? Because of the lease. But Jason Wright has said we want to open the new stadium in 2027.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, I think that timeline is off the table. I think they'll probably be there at least 2028. And one other note about DC, because I know people, I think people really want it to be in DC. Even if the owner changes, Mayor Muriel Bowser talked about, there were two obstacles always for getting the team back, and it was the name and the owner. And if the second part of that goes away, you would think, oh, there's going to be an avenue here. But I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, because I do think the mayor and the council chairman, their issues are preventing the delegate, Eleanor Holmes Norton, from introducing this legislation. And, I think that it would be if the owner changes, it would be a big help for those efforts. But by no means is it going to be, right away after that, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think there are other factors in there with how people want to develop that land and all that. And so there are definitely other things to consider, but it certainly opens that possibility a hell of a lot more once that happens. But long way to go on that. And by the way, one of the other small under the radar things would be running back, adding a third one. Jonathan Williams is a free agent. Jared Patterson, I mean, he's not unrestricted, but he is actually, I think he's a free agent.
Yeah,
too.
He's a free agent.
That's right. Right. So you need a third guy in that room, whether it's bringing back those guys, but I know they're going to want to look for one. I think that's on the priority list to help in a 17-game season. When you have two backs like that and you want to play this kind of style, you're going to need a third rugged guy to help you out, whether, again, it's Williams, whatever. So anyway, that's just another one. But I did want to bring up Stadium One. I appreciate you coming on. I told you I'd keep you to a certain time. I've already gone over, but I'm 70 minutes shy of where Ben would have kept you on his podcast. So shout out, Ben Standing.
The only thing you're doing is keeping me from pulling up my YouTube burner and commenting about Darnell, the tight end from Georgia. So,
all right, very good, Sam. Thanks a lot. Oh, by the way, do you have anything for the Super Bowl is going to be played by the time people listen to this? It will be over. So I'm not going to ask you who's going to win. But is there one lesson that this team can learn from either of those teams? You say this is what they got to do. Just whether it's roster building or anything like that. Get a quarterback.
The roster, well, no. So actually, the lesson that I think that you can learn from the Eagles is, like, if a guy isn't the answer, move on. Like the Eagles absorbed a record cap hit. I believe it was like $33 million in dead cap to move on from Carson Wentz, but they knew that he wasn't the guy, so they did it. And a lot of that comes down to ownership, and obviously the Commanders are not the only team in the NFL that hesitates to move on from guys because you're eating a lot of dead cap. But what Howie Roseman did to maximize a quarterback on a rookie contract, what owner Jeffrey Lurie did to absorb that dead cap and say, hey, you are going to have full spending power. Like, the thing that sticks out to me is just how aggressive they were at improving. Like, when we were up there in, I believe it was November, and Washington ran downhill and said, you are not going to stop us from running duo because you're soft inside and your edge rushers don't want to defend the run. Howie Roseman said after that game, he said, you know what? You're right. I'm going to go get Ndamukong Suh and Linval Joseph, two of the bigger interior defensive presences.
I love what they've done.
Yeah, and it goes back to me, like, when Washington lost Fedarian Mathis in week 1, their answer was signing Donovan Jeter. And I'm not saying Donovan Jeter's a bad player, and I'm not saying, they couldn't have gone at those numbers, but just what a contrast it was between Washington losing an interior guy and what they did and what Philadelphia did when their interior was exposed. And I think that's why one of these teams is in the Super Bowl.
It is. And I will say
a lot of other stuff too. Hold on, just real quick. But
yeah.
that is a very micro way that one of those teams got to the Super Bowl.
And I think they did that all off season as well. And that's why they were in that spot. And it's why, whatever happened in that game. But I think it's right. And if you're Sue and Joseph, you're not signing here in week 1. You're going to wait to see what else comes about. But you're exactly right. It was the aggressive, so they took to do it. I will say, Sam, that as of right now, as of people listening to this, Washington is tied for first place in the NFC East in the 2023 standings. So, there you go. That's, if you want hope out there for you fans listening, there you go. They're tied for first right now. You can sleep well tonight. So, Sam, thanks a lot for joining me.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Keim.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Sam for joining me, and thank you, as always, for listening. I'll be back on Tuesday night, Wednesday morning with another podcast. So I'll talk to you next time.